How do you seize the most powerful empire on the planet when your face is your greatest liability? When everyone who looks at you can see the mark of a criminal? This was the challenge faced by the Median magus named Gaumata. He had no ears. They had been cut off by order of King Cyrus the Great, an eternal brand of shame meant to scream of his deceitful nature. Yet Gaumata decided to transform his disgrace into his most potent weapon. His plan was audacious to the point of madness. He intended to impersonate another man, not merely a wealthy nobleman or a general, but the son of Cyrus himself, the crown prince Bardiya. He held a crucial advantage. Gaumata bore a striking resemblance to the prince, almost his doppelganger. However, there was a critical catch that turned the entire endeavor into a suicidal gamble. The true Prince Bardiya was dead. He had been secretly executed on the orders of his own brother, King Cambyses II. A paranoid tyrant, Cambyses feared his popular brother would usurp the throne while he was campaigning in distant Egypt. The murder was carried out in the strictest secrecy. No one, apart from a handful of loyal assassins, knew the prince was no longer alive. The entire empire believed Bardiya was simply living in seclusion within his palace. Into this vacuum of power and ignorance, Gaumata burst forth. He grew long hair and a beard to conceal his missing ears. He secluded himself within the palace, communicating with the outside world only through servants and rare, distant appearances on a balcony. From these shadows, he struck. He declared himself King Bardiya, son of Cyrus, proclaiming that the tyrant Cambyses had been overthrown. And the people believed him. Why? Because they wanted to believe. They were weary of Cambyses' cruelty, his endless wars, and oppressive taxes. The false Bardiya granted them what they craved. He abolished all tributes and military conscription for a full 3 years. This news spread like wildfire across the empire. Cities and provinces, from Babylon to Bactria, pledged allegiance one after another to the new, benevolent king. In mere months, a low-born magus, a disfigured criminal, became the ruler of half the known world. The true king, still mired in the Egyptian sands, had no inkling that his empire had just been stolen. Yet, within the quiet confines of his palace, Gaumata did not celebrate his victory. He was an outsider in this world of gold and marble. He was not Persian. He was a Mede, a descendant of those whom the Persians had once conquered, transforming proud kings into subservient priests. From childhood, he had regarded the Persian nobility with a quiet, cold hatred. He saw their arrogance, their hollowness, their certainty that the world belonged to them by right of birth. He was smarter, faster, and craftier than all of them, but in their world, that didn't matter. You were either born with a silver spoon in your mouth or you swallowed dust by the roadside. He chose a third path, deception. But the system caught him. Everything changed the day he, still young, was dragged before the throne of Cyrus the Great for some audacious scheme. The sentence was swift and brutal, a searing knife, a scream no one heard. It wasn't just pain, it was a brand, a public humiliation meant to break him forever. The system didn't merely cast him out, it wrote on his face, "You are a liar, and everyone shall see it until your dying day." It was then, bleeding in shame, that he made his decision. If the world deemed him a liar, he would become the greatest liar in history. If his fate was to wear a mask, he would don the mask of the state's most powerful man. He wouldn't just reclaim respect, he would take everything from them. His decrees abolishing taxes and military service were not mere populism. They were precise, calculated strikes at the very foundation of Persian power, the army and treasury that kept his people subjugated. Every step he took. On the throne was an act of vengeance. He would force the empire that had disfigured him to kneel before the man with no ears. But his vengeance was only possible because the Persian Empire itself was a colossus with feet of clay. It was not a unified state, but a patchwork quilt of dozens of conquered peoples, hastily stitched together by the sword of Cyrus the Great. Babylonians, Lydians, Egyptians, Medes, they all still remembered times when they had their own kings and gods. Now they paid tribute to the Persians, sent their sons into the Persian army, and bowed before Persian governors. The empire rested on fear and custom, and Gaumata knew, pull just the right thread, and the entire structure would unravel. The era was wild and fast-paced. The world was changing with kaleidoscopic speed. Just a generation ago, Persians were merely one of many tribes, but now their will was law from India to Greece. This rapid pace, however, created chaos. There were no clear laws of succession beyond the right of the strong. Communication was rudimentary. News of a change in kingship in the capital took months to reach the distant provinces. In a world without newspapers or telegraphs, reality was what was proclaimed in the palace, and the palace now spoke with Gaumata's voice. The empire was suffocating. It choked under taxes that drained its lifeblood to fund Cambyses' endless Egyptian campaign. It suffocated under the arrogance of Persian nobility, who treated conquered lands as their personal estates. People were tired of war, tired of cruelty, tired of a king who was far away, concerned only with his conquests. Into this chasm of widespread weariness, the impostor struck. He offered peace, prosperity, and justice. He spoke to each nation in the language of its secret desires. Gaumata didn't merely deceive the system, he offered it an alternative it desperately wanted to believe. His lie proved more appealing than the harsh truth. He wasn't the cause of the empire's illness, but its most vivid symptom. His first act was to purge the palace. Everyone close to Cambyses, anyone who might too clearly remember Bardiya's true face, generals, advisors, even personal servants, vanished one by one. They were taken away at night. The official story was that they were accomplices of the tyrant, punished for crimes against the people. In reality, they were living evidence, and Gaumata was methodically eliminating each one. This was not mere paranoia. It was a cold, calculated cleansing of witnesses executed with the scope of state policy. Next, he struck at the very heart of the Persian nobility, where their bloodline and honor resided, the harems. By law, a new king inherited not only the throne, but also all the women of his predecessor. Gaumata immediately took the harems of Cyrus the Great and Cambyses into his own quarters. This was a stroke of genius. He wasn't merely satisfying his desires, he was taking the wives and daughters of the most influential Persian families hostage. He made them his concubines, imprisoning them in a gilded cage. None of them could send messages to their powerful families, and any attempt at conspiracy now jeopardized their closest female relatives. But even this was not enough. His hatred ran deeper than a mere lust for power. He decided to destroy the very soul of Persia. Throughout the country, Persian sanctuaries, which they called *Iadanas*, were set ablaze. He declared them places of worship for false gods and ordered them razed to the ground. On their ashes, he erected altars for his own Median gods. Median magi, his former companions in humiliation, now became high priests and judges throughout the empire. He didn't just seize the Persian state, he began to erase Persian faith itself, replacing it with his own. This was no longer mere politics, it was a holy war waged by one man against an entire civilization. Yet this war was fought not with swords but with whispers, and Gaumata's primary weapon became silence. He transformed his greatest weakness, the necessity of hiding, into a source of immense power. A king whom no one sees becomes a legend. He makes no mistakes, never ages, shows no weakness. His image could be molded like clay, creating the ideal ruler everyone had awaited. Every public absence only reinforced the myth. People imagined a wise and benevolent monarch toiling tirelessly in his chambers for their welfare. And he gave them precisely what they wanted. He didn't ask for love, he bought it, wholesale, for the entire empire. 3 years without taxes, 3 years without military conscription. This was not a royal decree, it was the largest bribe in human history. He offered every peasant, every artisan, every merchant a purse of gold and said, "This is from me to you, just be silent and loyal." Millions gladly accepted the deal. What did it matter to them if the king had ears or not, if their granaries were full and their sons were home instead of rotting in the Egyptian desert? From his chambers, he controlled reality through the only people he trusted, other Median magi. They were his praetorian guard of lies. They were his eyes, ears, and most importantly, his voice. They disseminated decrees, interpreted his will, and appointed and dismissed officials. They created an impenetrable cocoon around the palace, an information vacuum where the impostor's word was the sole truth. Anyone who doubted vanished. Anyone who asked too many questions was declared a traitor. He didn't just seize power, he monopolized reality itself. Gaumata was a brilliant psychologist. He understood a fundamental truth about power. People believe not in truth, but in the lie that makes their lives easier and richer. He didn't try to prove he was the real Bardiya. He simply made it advantageous for everyone to believe he was. His throne rested not on blood right or divine blessing, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of human greed and fear. Yet this grand spectacle was not a one-man show. Behind the scenes, in the shadow of the throne, stood his brother, Patizithes. If Gaumata was the face and voice of the coup, Patizithes was its hands and brain. He organized the palace purges, managed the network of magus spies, and ensured the gilded cage of the harem remained impenetrable. He was the impostor's shadow, his chief enforcer, and the only person in the world who knew the full truth. Together they formed a perfect mechanism of deception. One created the myth, the other eliminated all who could destroy it. But not everyone in Persia was willing to sell their country for 3 years of comfortable living. Among the Persian nobility was a man named Otanes. Head of one of the 7 great houses, he was too shrewd to fall for cheap populism and too proud to bow to an upstart. He remembered the real Bardiya, and he saw that the new king was not him. This one constantly hid, feared the light, and ruled through intermediaries. Otanes' suspicions grew daily, solidifying into an icy certainty. A stranger sat on the throne. But how to prove it? Any direct accusation meant treason and inevitable death. It was then that Otanes found a loophole, a weak link in the perfect fortress of lies. His own daughter, Fatima, was one of the wives in the royal harem. Through a loyal eunuch, he conveyed a secret, deadly, dangerous instruction to her. He didn't ask her to steal documents or eavesdrop on conversations. He asked for the unthinkable. The next night, the message read, "When the king sleeps in your embrace, touch his head. Ascertain if his ears are present." Fatima understood everything. If the king had no ears, then he was not the son of Cyrus. He was Gaumata the magus, whom her father had once seen at trial. That night, in the silken silence of the royal bedchamber, the fate of an empire hung in the balance. Fatima waited until the impostor's breathing became even and deep. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed the guards outside the door must hear it. With a trembling hand, inch by agonizing inch, she reached for his head beneath his thick hair. She felt smooth, scarred tissue where an earlobe should have been. In that instant, the illusion shattered. A secret worth an empire no longer belonged to Gaumata alone. Now it was a weapon in the hands of his deadliest foe. The news struck Otanes like lightning. The truth was more terrifying than any suspicion. He immediately convened a secret council. The 6 heads of the great Persian houses, equal to him in blood and power. In the dim light of his home, under the watchful eyes of the empire's most dangerous men, he uttered the fateful words, "The king has no ears." A silence, thick as blood, fell over the room. To move against the king was certain death. But to remain silent meant watching a Median priest grind everything their fathers had fought for into dust. The risk was monstrous, but the alternative, slavery in their own land, was even worse. 7 daggers gleamed in the lamplight that night. 7 aristocrats swore to kill the impostor or die trying. Their plan was simple and suicidal. They didn't gather an army or incite a rebellion. That would have been too slow and too loud. They decided to strike themselves. 7 aristocrats, armed only with short daggers concealed beneath their clothes, were to storm the citadel and reach the inner chambers. Their only advantage was their status. The guards at the gates knew them by sight. These were pillars of the empire. They dared not stop the great houses of Persia, who claimed they were going to report to their sovereign. Door after door, corridor after corridor, they advanced into the very heart of the lie. The doors to the impostor's chambers burst open. Gaumata and his brother Patizithes understood everything in an instant. The grand deception they had meticulously built for months collapsed in a second. Patizithes, loyal bodyguard and the brains of the coup, attempted to resist but was pierced by a dozen blades. Gaumata, unarmed and frantic with terror, fled through the endless corridors of his stolen palace. a wild hunt began. 7 of the empire's most noble grandees, like a pack of wolves, chased the terrified magus, who just that morning had been their god and king, across the marble floors. He was cornered by the youngest and most ambitious of the conspirators, Darius. In the dark room where the impostor was trapped, shadows and bodies mingled. Darius, fearing he might wound his ally who had seized Gaumata in the melee, struck almost blindly. The dagger found its mark precisely. The scream was cut short. When torches were lit, they saw him, sprawled on the floor, a dagger in his chest. But this wasn't enough. To prove to the entire world that the deception was over, they severed his head and displayed it in the capital's main square alongside his brothers. The greatest scam in ancient history ended in a bloodbath. But for millions of the empire's inhabitants, the morning brought no relief. Their 3-year reprieve from taxes and military service ended the very moment the magus's head touched the dusty cobblestones. The impostor's generous gifts were immediately revoked. Tax collectors and recruiters once again fanned out across the provinces. The festivities were over. The empire returned to its usual affairs, war and tribute collection. Darius and the other conspirators were not inclined to forgive. They unleashed a reign of terror. Throughout the capital, a hunt began for the median magi, the pillars of the fallen regime. They were dragged from their homes, killed in the streets without trial or judgment. Any Persian who killed a magus could claim his property. This slaughter went down in history as the Slaughter of the Magi and became an annual festival during which no Mede dared show himself in public. This was more than just vengeance. It was a political declaration. Persian. Authority was restored, and anyone who had supported the impostor would pay with their blood. But the main question remained unanswered. Who would rule now? The 7 saviors of Persia made a pact. The new king would be chosen from among them. But whoever he became, the other 6 houses and their descendants would forever receive special status. They would be permitted to enter the king's presence without announcement, be exempt from certain taxes, and their word would be second only to the king's. In essence, they created an oligarchy, cementing their power into the very foundation of the state. They would no longer allow one man, whether legitimate king or impostor, to rule without their control. Darius, having become king, ensured this story would never be forgotten. He ordered it carved into the colossal Behistun rock, in 3 languages, for all the peoples of the empire. This was history's first PR campaign of such magnitude. For centuries, millions read the official version. The wicked magus Gaumata deceived the people, and the noble Darius saved Persia. The story of the man without ears became the official founding myth of a new dynasty, a warning to all future impostors, and a justification for those who had shed blood to seize the throne. But what if the greatest lie was carved not on Gaumata's face, but on the stone of the Behistun rock? What if this entire story is merely the propaganda of the victor? Some historians today pose an uncomfortable question. Was Gaumata truly an impostor? Or did Darius, an ambitious aristocrat, not of royal lineage, simply kill the real Prince Bardiya, and, to justify his bloody path to the throne, invent a brilliant story about a low-born, earless magus? We will never know the truth. It is buried beneath 25 centuries of dust and deception. And therein lies the central paradox. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who he truly was. What matters is who he became. Gaumata left no laws, no dynasty, no built cities. He ruled for only 7 months. Yet he left behind something far more enduring, an idea. The idea that a system, seemingly unshakable, can be subverted. That one man, driven by hatred and brilliant calculation, can bring an entire empire to its knees without drawing a sword. He proved that power is merely a story everyone agrees to believe, and the one who can tell the best story will rule the world. All his life, he desperately tried to conceal his disfigurement. He grew his hair, hid in shadows, surrounded himself with a wall of silence, just so no one would see his disgrace. He wanted the world to forget the brand seared onto his face. But history is the cruelest of poets. It stripped him of everything, power, life, even his name. Yet in return, it granted him a grim immortality. It made his brand his eternal title. For millennia to come, he remained in humanity's memory not as a king or a magus, but as the man without ears. The mask of shame he so detested ultimately became his true face in eternity.